I got an invitation to an old friend of mine's shop today. He said he had something in his garage he felt I might like, and he needed a little bit of help with.
Well.
I've known this guy for a long time. He's watched my kids grow up, and we've raced together for years. Mr. Mike Scarborough out of Newark, Ohio. Mike is a very dear friend of mine. I've known him for years and years. We've drag raced together. We've slot car raced together. We've raced RC cars together. And Mike is working on this Nova for a customer of his. This is a 1970 Nova with a 427 big block Chevy and a 700 R4 transmission. Street car in every sense of the word. The car is gorgeous, and it reminds me so much of my car before the kids were ever born. My car used to look exactly like this. It was all black. I've done a few things for Mike over the years, rebuilding carburetors and helping him tune things. And this car has a little bit of an issue idling rich, but it has very good throttle response. It sounds good. It runs really good. But it'll burn your eyes to sit there and listen to it idle. So the first thing I did was check the float levels, which looked A-OK.
Fire it up, Scarborough. Let me see what you're dealing with.
It's hard to beat a big block Chevy breathing through 3-inch Flowmasters. God, this thing sounds good, and it sounds so much like my car back in the day, which I think is why Mr. Mike Scarborough called me over. He knows I'm down a little bit. And there's nothing better for me than some screwdrivers and a timing light to get me in a good mood. So when I went over to see Mike today, he fired that Nova up, and it sounds really good. He says it runs really good. The roads were wet today. It was raining, so I couldn't take it out for a test drive. But I can tell just by the throttle response, and when you put it in gear, it doesn't try and die or anything like that. It's a really pretty decent combination. It's a 373 rear end gear, 700 R4 with a 10-inch 3000 stall, somewhat in that area. You know, the car, it runs really good. There's no question. But it has one of the most common issues for someone with a fairly radical camshaft in a street car with a carburetor. They tend to idle a little bit rich. They sound really good maybe, but you can just smell it. It just burns your eyes. It stinks. It's really usually not so much the carburetor's fault. It's usually ignition timing related, which is what I explained to Mike. So the only thing I think that you could improve on is really the distributor still has the mechanical advance built in it. Yeah. So when you've set the initial timing at 36 and you rev it up, the mechanical advance is still in there, and it's evidently got a 15-degree bushing in it because it jumps 15 degrees. So when you go from 36, well, it's not, actually it's 10 degrees because it jumps from 36 to 45. So on pump gas at 45 degrees, that's probably too much timing if it's got the compression that you said it does, if it's got a dome piston in it.
Turn it down a little bit.
Well, you can't.
No.
Because if you turn the initial down past, see, honestly, in my opinion, it's probably going to need about 40 to 42 degrees initial, okay? And that would clean up some of the stinking that you're smelling, because I've leaned the carburetor out as far as I can lean it out without it stumbling, okay? But it really needs to have a little bit more initial advance for it to burn the fuel at idle the way it needs to. So if you set the ignition timing at, say, 42 degrees right now, then you're going to have 52 degrees total once the mechanical comes in. So what I would do is pull the distributor out of it and lock the ignition timing out in the distributor. So whatever you set it at initial is all it has, and it doesn't come up anymore.
Cool.
But other than that, I think it's in pretty good shape. It sounds really good.
Oh yeah.
Good looking car. Good looking car. Wow. So when I walked in down there, I really had no idea what Michael was calling me down there for. So I wasn't really prepared to do an impromptu video on tuning a carburetor on a car. I was mostly concerned with catching up with Mike and Sean Allen, who I've also known for a long time. I've known both those guys. Usually if there's a situation where you see Mike Scarborough out screwing around someplace, you're going to see Sean Allen. And the three of us have been really good friends for a long time. But anyway, so when I went over there today, I wasn't really expecting to do a carburetor tuning video, but after seeing the car, you know, I was videoing as I walked through the door. I didn't know what I was going to see. He just said he had something for me, and he was acting kind of ornery about it. So I had my phone out and I was recording just to see what in the heck he has planned. And I'm glad I did. But that leads me to the video I'm going to do tonight. You know, I know a lot of you have been asking for tech videos, carburetor videos, and this is a good one because it's a very common problem with, I would say, mild to hot street cars with carbureted engines, that especially small block Chevys, because a small block Chevy, the cam core is so small in them, to get the engines to run halfway decent, the cam profiles get pretty aggressive compared to an LS. And what I mean by that is the cam lobe, the ramp on the cam lobes have to be pretty aggressive. And even with a big block Chevy, it's kind of the same way. But anytime you've got a fairly aggressive camshaft, what you would consider a mild race camshaft or a high performance camshaft that won't idle below, let's say it just doesn't seem to want to idle very well below 900 RPM. Anytime you've got a camshaft and an engine combination that won't idle below 900 RPM, there's a pretty good chance that the engine would run better with more initial timing. Now, you know, there's vacuum advance, there's mechanical advance, and your initial advance, and a lot of people get confused on what all those things mean. But for this video, we're going to concentrate strictly on just a locked out distributor, which is really what that car needs. And the reason it needs the ignition timing locked out, or what I would say locked out, there's a lot of different ways to do it. But in this example, that car didn't have a vacuum advance pod, so that's out. Okay, so there's no vacuum advance to hook up or use. So what you would do is take the distributor part, and I've shown that in some of my older videos, I think, taking an MSD distributor part and locking the timing out. If you need to see that, I'm sure if you search on here, someone's got a video on there showing exactly how to do it. But and anyway, when you've got a camshaft that won't idle below 900 RPM in a combination, it needs a little bit more initial advance for the engine to burn the air-fuel mixture completely at idle. So like a stock engine may only need 15 or 20 degrees. They idle really clean. They don't need a lot of ignition advance. But when you've got a fairly radical camshaft, like what's in the 55 Chevy, in a small cubic inch engine, you need to run considerably more initial advance. And that's why the race cars, they generally lock the timing out, and whatever the initial is basically where the ignition timing stays throughout the RPM range. But when you've got a big camshaft like that, lots of air and lots of fuel, lots of reversion due to the cam profile, you tend to need a lot of ignition timing to burn that air-fuel mixture completely at idle. Now, what you can do is you can go ahead and turn the idle mixture screws in. Generally, they start at about a turn and a half out from fully closed. And fully closed means the idle mixture screws are turned all the way in until they stop. And from that point, you turn the idle mixture screws out a turn and a half. And that's your initial starting point on a Holley carburetor. Or a Holley style carburetor, I should say. And then you can lean the idle mixture screws out from there. Now, usually you can use a vacuum gauge if you want to use a vacuum gauge, and you can watch the vacuum reading, and you turn the idle mixture screws all in the same amount, and you can watch the vacuum reading increase or decrease. And you want to turn them in until the idle increases and the vacuum increases to the highest point, and that's usually where the engine's going to idle the best, and it'll smell the cleanest out the exhaust. Now, on the primary side of the carburetor, a lot of times you might have to run the idle mixture screws out a quarter or half a turn from perfect and make it run just a little bit rich to overcome a lean condition from transition from idle to part throttle. And that's pretty common, especially on a race car or something with a pretty nasty cam. But if you're good at tuning carburetors and accelerator pump cams and squirters and things of that nature, you can tune around that, and you won't have to have it stinking and rich. But the main thing that everybody needs to pay attention to right off the bat is to make sure that the car has enough initial ignition timing to burn the air-fuel mixture completely to begin with, because you can't tune a carburetor to burn clean when you're not giving the engine enough initial advance to begin with. So that's one thing that I see a lot of. Dead giveaways. When you pull the air filter off and the top of the carburetor is all black, sooty looking, that's a real good indication that it's not got enough ignition timing, and that's how that Nova was today. The top of the carburetor was kind of black. I checked of course I checked the float levels. That's a clear indicator. If the float levels are way too high, that's a clear indicator that it's going to idle rich regardless of how much timing's in it. But the float levels looked really good. So we moved from float levels to turning all 4 idle mixture screws in all the way and counting how many turns out they were. And they were all at exactly 1.5 turns from completely shut, completely closed. So that wasn't an issue. So I got the timing light out, and that's when I found out that it only had 36 degrees initial advance, which is, in my opinion, would be bare minimum. 36 degrees on a 427 big block or a 355, with a fairly hot camshaft in it like what that car had. 36 degrees is like your bare minimum, especially on a pump gas engine. Unfortunately, that car still had the mechanical advance in it. And I explained to Mike, if you remove the mechanical advance, lock it out, set the timing at 42 degrees, it'll idle cleaner. It may start a little harder. You may have to use a start retard on it, but it'll run much better. It'll have much better throttle response, and it won't burn your eyes sitting there idling. So anyway, guys, I wasn't really prepared to do a carburetor tech video today, and this is kind of all over the place, and maybe I'm not doing it justice the way I'm doing it. But the most common carburetor problem that's never a carburetor problem is not enough initial advance. So if you've got a car at home that is a pump gas street car and it's got a little bit too much of a camshaft in it, or kind of a wild camshaft in it, sounds really good, but it stinks, and you're embarrassed. You pull into the cruise in night or your car shows or whatever, and the thing stinks, and everybody's like, a lot of times pump gas engines with a radical camshaft in them, a lot of times they'll smell really rich and they'll smoke blue, and it almost look like oil smoke. But in reality, sometimes it's just not burning all the air-fuel mixture that's getting into the combustion chamber due to all the reversion in the intake manifold. And so running a little bit more initial advance than maybe what you'd think it would need, or maybe what you're running now, will help cure that. But it can also cause hard starting problems. So that's why if it's a street car, sometimes I'll tell people to go ahead and run the vacuum advance and hook the vacuum advance port or the vacuum advance pod to the vacuum port on the carburetor that has vacuum at idle. And what that does is it will allow the engine to start with, say, 8 degrees less timing. Let's say the vacuum advance canister adds 8 degrees of advance under vacuum. So when you go to turn the car over and there's no vacuum at low RPM, it's turning over, the car will start. Once the vacuum builds, the vacuum advance pod pulls the timing up, and that increases your initial timing at idle. And of course, it will back off as you give it gas. And that's when you would want to have your mechanical weights take over and start to bring the ignition advance in. But if you've got something fairly wild like the 55 Chevy here, it's got a hydraulic roller camshaft, and it's really kind of too big for it. It's pretty nasty. It's not very nice to drive. It's kind of a pain. But if you've got something that's fairly radical, 240 degrees at 50 duration and bigger in a small block Chevy, you're probably going to need at least a minimum of 36 degrees initial advance for the car to run properly and idle properly and clean. Now, on the camshaft situation, you know, you take let's say you've got a 236 duration at 50, 520 lift hydraulic roller. Well, if you take that camshaft, ground on, say, a 106 center line, and you put that in a 283, it's going to sound pretty radical, okay, because the cubic inch is small. But if you take that same camshaft and put it in a 400, you won't even hardly be able to hear it. So everything's relative to cubic inch and duration, okay? The more duration and the less cubic inch, the more radical the camshaft's going to sound. And the opposite is true as well. So today was fun. I really enjoyed catching up with my buddies, and I really appreciate them thinking of me. Those two have watched my boys grow up from the day they were born until today. I mean, they know pretty much everything that those kids have ever done, and you know, they love and they care about our family because they're old friends. I've known them before we had a YouTube channel. I've known them before I had a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of. So I greatly appreciate those guys thinking of me today, knowing that things are rough around here with the kids and things that are going on, and they just kind of wanted to get me out of the house and give me something to do. And they both know how much I enjoy tuning carbureted engines, and I'm sure Mike could have done that on his own. He just wanted to get me over there today. So thank you, Mike. Sean, greatly appreciate you guys. Thank you for your friendship. This lifestyle and this culture is more than just cars. It's more than just racing. It's more than everything that the sum of everything that you see in these videos. It's also about friendship and family. And I don't know if you guys watched, I'm sure you probably did, Billy's video when Sean Ellington gave Billy the headers off the OG Murder Nova. If you watch that video, at the beginning of the video, when Billy gets the headers from Sean talks a little bit about family. And it was probably the most inspirational thing I think I've ever heard anybody from that television show say. And to have him say it to me and Billy in person, and tell us that they watch the videos and like they keep up with it. I'm like, Sean said, we're going to come out and watch you guys race sometime. I'm like, watch us race? What the hell why would you care about watching us race? But the reality is, there's a lot of different YouTube channels that, in my opinion, probably put out a little bit better content than ours. The video equipment is better. Maybe the editing sometimes is better, and the music is better, and just, you know, I'm not going to name any names, but there's a lot of them out there that put out a really, really high quality racing footage content. And for whatever reason, their channels haven't taken off as well as my kids, and in some cases even mine. And I've told Billy in the past, you know, part of the reason I started my channel was because I wanted to show the family aspect, the personal aspect of it, because that's what people will connect with. I mean, anybody can watch racing videos on any channel on YouTube, and they're all the same content, the same cars making the same passes at the same place. You know, there'll be 4 or 5 YouTube channels that dig or die video and making videos. But what sets ours apart, I think, is the family aspect of it. And I try to show the good and the bad. Sometimes I get in trouble with my family for showing some of the things that I feel are important, but a lot of people connect with it because they go through the same things. And it's like a lot of the YouTube channels that are very popular are, I wouldn't say fake. I'm not trying to say anything like that, but like they don't show the hard times too. It's not all glamour and glitz and fun times, and it's not like that. There's a lot of struggle. There's a lot of sacrifice. There's a lot of problems day to day. And I think that's what sets us apart a little bit, that people connect with us for some reason. I think it's just because we show the family aspect of it. And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. I'm gonna hop off here. I feel like I'm rambling. That's gonna be my video for today. Thank you all for watching. Like and share and subscribe and the whole thing. Comments, good and bad. So it's whatever. Talk to y'all later. Good night.